I hope you are all well this morning, this very cold morning, actually. And, of course, a very happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers in the room. It simply isn't enough that we only have one calendar day to show and celebrate you for all that you've done for us as your children. However, I still would like to take a chance to say that we really appreciate all that you've done, and we really are grateful for all that you do, and we really love you so very much. Amen. All right. In case you're here for the first time, my name is Ben, and today we will be continuing with a series that our brother Jake started last week. And my wife and I weren't able to be here physically to hear the message live, but we got a chance to catch up to it on the YouTube channel. And I really enjoyed learning about why it is important to make quality choices. And I also got very curious to know what were those criteria that Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett used to make the quality choices, both daily and yearly. And if you haven't got any idea of what I'm talking about, please feel free to go back onto YouTube and catch up on that message. It really was a powerful message. So thank you very much, Jake, for that. Now, as Jake said, we are on an 11-week-long series on choices. And the focus on the message today will be on choosing to be content. And while the goal is for us to be content in every area of our lives, for time's sake, we're only going to examine 2 areas that we should all choose to be content in. And hopefully you'll take some time during the week to go back home and just think about the other areas in your life that we should all choose to be content in. As we go through the message, my prayer is that the Lord may guide my words and open our hearts to receive his message. Amen. All right, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. And I would like to start with a question or an observation. Have you realized how society today has driven us to a point where we consume things at an extremely alarming rate? I promise you, we live in a world where new things keep popping out of everything, everywhere, and practically every day, right? In a world where everything keeps getting bigger, better, flashier, fancier, and sometimes all of the above combined. And not only that, certain mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that we remain trapped to consuming what's available. It is even starting to feel like whatever you get isn't enough anymore. I'm sure you have read the following statement while online shopping, right? It's going to come up on the screen. The first one being, you might also like. Frequently bought together. Consumers who viewed this item also viewed. It's like they keep trying to get us to buy more stuff. And the scariest part is that we are constantly being prompted in a very subtle manner to replace what we already have or to get even more stuff. And this seriously got me thinking. And I would like to ask this. When was the last time that you actually used something until it wasn't working anymore? Now, I don't know about you, you may be better than me, but I sincerely don't remember, you know? And believe it or not, there used to be a time whereby the normal thing was that people would use the things until they broke, and when that time actually arrived, they would take it in to be fixed so that they could use it longer. But nowadays, it's not a thing anymore, right? When you consider all of the trade-ins and trade-ups and the contract upgrades and options that are available to us nowadays, it has become very seldom that one will use something until it breaks. Why is that? If you know me at all, and if you know me very well, you would know that I papa hard. I like things, especially gadgets. And if I'm to be honest, my most constant desire in the past decade or so is and has always been to be up to date with the latest iPhone or MacBook or iPad or AirPods. And I'm sure by now you've realized that I'm an Apple fanatic, right? I actually frequently go onto YouTube to hear about the latest rumors or to hear about what developments are coming up, just so that I could remain aware of what's going to be released soon, right? And once they are released, oh man, it's like there is World War III going on inside me. I have to fight the temptation not to run to that app store. I mean, just last year, and I'm not proud of this, a couple of weeks before I got married, Apple released the iPhone 13, and I literally sat there and looking at my bank savings for the wedding and thinking to myself, I have enough to get this fabulous-looking, feature-packed iPhone 13 Pro Max. Like, really? What was wrong with me? My phone wasn't even barely a year old. So why was I even thinking about changing it? Why did I need to get the next one? And this predicament of mine should be able to paint very clearly the picture the world is tricking us to believe that whatever we have is not enough. And this is achieved not necessarily by highlighting what we don't have, but by making us aware of what we could have. And consequently, what we do have all of a sudden seems like it's not enough anymore. It is this awareness, my brothers and sisters, that often fuels our discontentment with the stuff that we have. Look with me in the book of Haggai. It's going to come up on the screen. Haggai 1, chapter 1, verses 5 to 7. And it says, "Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much but harvest little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it." This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You know, these words the Lord spoke through the prophet Haggai help us to come to the realization of two things. The first is that being discontent with the things that we have is not something specific to our generation. Folks that lived thousands of years ago already were discontent with what they had. The problem has just evolved over the years. And the second thing is that we really need to pay attention to our thoughts, which becomes our words, which becomes our actions, which becomes our habits, which becomes our character, which becomes our destiny. I don't know if this famous saying by Lao Tzu was an attempt of him to try and break down what God meant here in Haggai, but the sentiment, the core message that we get here is the same. We need to pay attention to our ways. Think about it. What is it that we do when we are tempted or when we want to get the next best thing? Take my situation, for instance. Imagine if I actually had used my wedding saving to get that phone. I would either not be married today, or I would have taken up a loan to make up for the deficits that I would have created in my budget. And I would also end up with a wife that wouldn't be happy with me, right? And this is not unique to me. How many times have you heard of someone or have been the one that took out a loan to get the next best thing? Or even started spending more of your income to get the newer car or the newer car model, the bigger house, the next phone? And I'm not saying that there is anything intrinsically wrong with that. But what I am saying is that if you're getting the next best thing for the sake of just having it and not because you need it, if you are getting it because being seen with it will somewhat add to your value and how you are seen by society. And worse, if doing it leaves you in a worse financial state, then there is everything wrong with that. We cannot let ourselves be so discontent with our stuff that it costs us our peace of mind, flexibility in our budgets, or even the ability to be generous. There is something so unsettling with having too much debt credit, with not having enough savings because you own so much stuff that you don't even have enough room in your house to keep it, with not having enough margin within your budget. And honestly, you may be making a whole lot of money in a month, but if because of your appetite, if your appetite for the latest thing out there is just as big as your desire to get, is just as big as your paycheck, then you will never have enough, and you will never feel financially free, stable, or secure. And there is something unsettling about feeling generous in our hearts, but not being able to live it out because we still have so much that we are still paying for, and we don't have enough left to give. Another thing that people my age in particular talk a lot about is wanting to build generational wealth. And the way that they go about it is by slaving way too hard and working way too hard and burning out to make enough to afford what their heart desires and have enough to save. But then they don't have enough left to live. And the better approach would be to rather try and live only on the bare minimum and saving the rest, right? There is something very wrong when the focus of our lives becomes the next upgrade or the next hot thing out there. Let us turn to the book of 1 Timothy, the letter of Paul to Timothy in chapter 6. It's again going to come up on the screen, and we'll read from verse 6 to 8. It says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." You know, when Paul wrote these words to Timothy, he was addressing an issue in the church where people started using Christianity to enrich themselves. Nevertheless, the core concepts that he speaks about here can really teach us a couple of things about choosing to be content with what we have. Firstly, godliness should be the one and only thing that should consume our innermost desire. If we are to achieve contentment simply because we are leading Christ-like lives, then we would have achieved everything that matters. Why? Well, verse 7 tells us why. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. I mean, if God really was worried about us acquiring things and owning things, I'm sure he would have built our bodies in a way that we would have pockets built in so that we can keep all of the stuff that we are acquiring, right? But he didn't. And when eventually we pass on, it simply exists nothing into this universe or whatever universe that's out there that we can take with us. Everything stays behind. I heard a question once that I cannot help but relay back to you, and the question goes like this. Besides stuff, what will you leave behind? If only we were to be content with being Christ-like over chasing after things, then we would be able to have more time to actually reach out to the lost, to serve, and to love people the way we really ought to love them. We would be able to make a huge impact on the world, and that would be a worthwhile legacy to leave behind. Think of the disciples mentioned in Acts 2, who chose to sell their possessions to make sure that no one lacked anything within the community. And about 2,000 years later, we are still benefiting from that impact that they have done to the world. We are still learning from that. So today I would like to encourage us to choose to be content with what we have and to redirect our energy so that we may be able to focus on being Christ-like. Amen? All right. In addition to that, in addition with being content with what we have, we should further choose to be content with where we are. Now, unlike with the case of what we have, a case in which we've got more control, when it comes to the case of where we are, it is a case whereby more often than not, we don't have the extravagance of control. In fact, this is an area where we need to surrender our control to factors beyond our power and ability. I mean, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation in seasons of singleness, where we may desire to be in a relationship, but the other gender seem not to see us. I mean, it's not unusual to find people that have worked on themselves such that they would be emotionally and spiritually and financially ready to date, but dololo, nothing, right? And this then takes us to a different phase, even in a different season, which is a season of waiting. And this season is probably the most recurring season in our lives, whereby we could be waiting for a relationship, a job promotion, or even for schooling institutions to get back to us, right? And the list goes on. It can happen in different ways. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation, in a season whereby we are in a toxic work environment, where every minute you spend sitting at your desk feels like you are being repeatedly stabbed by 1,000 needles day after day. And I am particularly familiar with that situation. And gathering the strength to go to work when you are in that phase feels like you have to drag yourself out of bed and gather the strength to go and fight Thanos or whatever big giant is out there. It is a nasty situation, and I'm grateful to be out of it. Sometimes it is being in a season where we are spiritually discouraged. Either you cannot connect with God, or you are reaching out to people, but there is just nothing happening. And no matter what we do, we just feel distant. And sometimes it's even not because we are in sin. Sometimes it is because we could be battling an illness, be it a benign illness or a life-threatening illness. And while none of those seasons or situations are particularly pleasant, and we would much rather be in a phase whereby we can enjoy in a different phase, we still have a choice to be content in them. We can choose to be miserable because of them and let them become the thieves in our lives that come and steal and kill and destroy any glimpse of joy or happiness or satisfaction in our lives. Or we can choose to let Christ give us life to the full through those situations. That is John 10:10. There is a book written by a brother in the faith, a brother by the name of Thomas A. Jones. It's going to come up on the screen. It's called Mind Change that I'm reading. And in this book, he talks about how a single shift in our thinking can cause such a life-changing experience. He calls the chapter that he speaks about in the book, But God. You see, Thomas actually has been battling multiple sclerosis for approaching 3 decades. And multiple sclerosis, for short MS, is defined as a progressive degenerative disease. And that essentially means that it is a disease that gets worse over time. It is a condition that affects the brain and the spinal cord and can lead to a huge range of symptoms, which includes problems with vision, arm and leg movements, difficulties, loss of sensation, and balance, to name a few. And in many cases, it is possible to treat the symptoms, but that depends on how early those symptoms have been caught, right? And this disease is also known for reducing the life expectancy of those that suffer from it. So as you can imagine, this disease affected him badly, to the point whereby he went from walking normally to using a walking stick and to being completely paralyzed. He hated his condition, but he eventually learned to live with it. And now this brother in his book speaks about how we can often get into a pattern of thinking that, one, acknowledges the magnitude of God's power, what is true and what is right, and then throw in the word but in the mix, and finally to take on the negative circumstances that we are facing and focus on them. And the issue with that is that whenever we use the crucial word but, we tend to go away emphasizing on only that, on what comes after, right? So then we end up in a situation where in our hearts and in our thoughts, we end up in a situation where we think God, but the problem. And he encourages us to a change in our thinking, a shift in our mind that would enable us to take the same information, but reorder it to have the problem, but God. And because he himself practiced this mind shift, he found himself in a position whereby he could say the following about his disease, and I quote, "Multiple sclerosis is one of the best things that has ever happened to me." I mean, wow. The shift in his thinking really provided him with an utterly different outlook of his disease, right? And this is not the only place where we can see this. We see this, we can even pick up on this pattern from David in his Psalms. If you take Psalm 13, for instance, verses 1 to 2, it says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? And then in verses 5, he starts by saying, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. You see, despite the anguish that David must have felt where he was, a mind shift of his part enabled him to find contentment in the Lord, and that's changed his entire attitude. You see, choosing to be content with where you are does not mean accepting your situation and becoming a sitting duck. But it means that as you are going through your hard time, you are allowing the challenge to grow you, and you are relying on God's strength to push you forward. You are surrendering your everything to Him, and you are letting Him be God. Choosing to be content where you are is also about realizing that, yes, I am in a bad place, but I find satisfaction in the fact that God is bigger than the problem. Yes, I am suffering, but I am content knowing that God, the creator of everything, has got my back. And I want to end with 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 to 10, and it reads, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardship, in persecution, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Church, it is only in realizing that because His grace is sufficient for us, we do not need to chase after possessions, that we can choose to be content with what we have because we have Christ and Christ is enough. It is in realizing that thanks to Christ, we can be strong in our weaknesses, and we can choose to be content even when we feel stuck in an unhealthy and undesirable place. And because He is always going to be enough and His grace sufficient for us, we can choose to be content no matter what. Church, I hope you are encouraged and feel armed with the strength you need to choose to be content in every way. To God be the glory, and may you have a great Sunday. And again, happy Mother's Day.